Today, we're going to break down a really compelling Supreme Court case, People versus Mirandilla. And what makes this case so interesting is that it gets to the heart of a fundamental challenge in any legal system. What happens when you have two stories that are complete polar opposites? How do you find the truth?
I mean, look at this. On one side, you have the prosecution story, a truly harrowing 39-day kidnapping ordeal filled with violence and repeated assault. And on the other side, the defense has what they call the sweetheart theory, a story about two lovers who eloped, lived together, and then had a falling out. So the court's job was to somehow figure out which one of these two totally irreconcilable stories was the truth.
So, how in the world did they decide? Well, we're going to walk through it just like a formal case digest, following the exact roadmap the court used. We'll look at the facts, the key legal questions, how the court ruled, the legal principles they applied, and of course, the final judgment.
All right, first things first, let's lay out the facts. This is where we really get into the nitty-gritty of those two competing narratives that were presented to the court. The entire case for the prosecution hinges on the testimony of the victim, who is identified only as AAA to protect her identity. Her story starts at a town festival where she says she was abducted. For the next 39 days, she was held captive, constantly moved between different locations until one day she saw her chance, escaped, and ran straight to the police. And when she testified, she gave some really specific, really grim details. She said she was taken at knife point, held in different types of houses, raped 27 different times, often at gunpoint, and also sexually assaulted. But here's the crucial part. Her story wasn't just her word against his. A medical exam backed her up, finding physical evidence of intercourse and also a sexually transmitted disease.
Now hold on, because the defendant, Felipe Mirandilla, tells a story that is a total 180. He claims that, no, they met at a park, they started a relationship, and they decided to elope and live together as a couple. He doesn't deny they had sex nightly, but he insists it was always consensual. And according to him, the whole thing fell apart when they had a huge fight over an alleged abortion.
So you see the problem. You've got these two stories that just cannot both be true. This leads us right to the central question, the core legal issue the court had to solve. At the end of the day, it all boiled down to this one, simple but incredibly difficult question. Whose testimony is credible? Who do you believe? The entire case was going to hang on the answer to that. Okay, so now let's get into the really fascinating part, how the court actually sifted through all this to figure out who was telling the truth. This is where we see the legal system in action. The court started with this foundational rule of evidence. Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's not enough for a witness to seem believable on the stand. Their story itself has to make sense. It has to line up with common sense and what an ordinary person would find probable.
And when they applied that rule to AAA's testimony, a lot of things stood out. The trial judge, who actually saw her on the stand, found her incredibly convincing. She was consistent, she was firm, plus there was no obvious motive for her to lie. She went straight to the police. And of course, that powerful medical evidence backed up her claims.
Because her story was so strong and was supported by physical evidence, the court said the prosecution had established what's called a prima facie case. Now, that's a legal term, but think of it like this. On the surface, they had presented enough proof to win, unless the other side could successfully tear it all down.
And that is a huge deal in the legal world, because once that prima facie case is made, the tables turn. The pressure, the burden of evidence officially shifts. It's no longer on the prosecution to prove he's guilty, it's now on Mirandilla to prove his sweetheart theory was actually what happened.
And this is exactly where the defense's story started to completely fall apart. When you put their witnesses under the microscope, their stories just didn't line up. A friend who testified for the defense told conflicting stories. Even Mirandilla's own mother contradicted his timeline. And Mirandilla himself, he couldn't even keep his story straight about how he supposedly found out about that key abortion argument.
Now, these contradictions weren't just minor slip-ups. They were huge red flags for the court. And they allowed the judges to bring in some pretty powerful legal principles to make their final decision.
They used this old Latin maxim called falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. It sounds complicated, but it's basically a one lie, all lies rule. If a witness is caught lying about one important material thing, the judge has the right to decide that their entire testimony is worthless and can be thrown out.
Next, the court had to figure out exactly what crime or crimes were committed. And they decided it wasn't just kidnapping and rape as separate offenses. They classified it as a special complex crime. This is a specific legal category for when two crimes are so interconnected, where one is committed to make the other possible, that the law treats them as a single, much more serious offense.
And here's a really crucial legal twist. Even though AA testified that she was raped 27 times, under this special complex crime rule, the law doesn't count those as 27 separate crimes. Instead, all of those horrific acts get legally absorbed into the main crime of kidnapping with rape. It's punished as one single, indivisible offense.
So, after all that incredible legal analysis, what was the final outcome? Let's take a look at the verdict and the sentence. The Supreme Court came down with its final decision. It affirmed the conviction. Mirandilla was found guilty of the special complex crime of kidnapping and serious illegal detention with rape. He was sentenced to reclusion perpetua. That's basically life in prison, and it's without eligibility for parole. He was also ordered to pay a total of 180,000 pesos in damages to the victim.
You know, this case is such a powerful example of the incredible challenge our courts face every single day. How do you find the objective, legal truth when you're dealing with the messy, complicated, and often contradictory world of human testimony? It shows us the rigorous process the law uses to get to an answer, but it also leaves you with that one big question. How can we ever be 100% certain that the legal truth is what actually happened?